Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Retro Monster Truck Review. Welcome back to the Retro Monster Truck Review, is what I should say. We did take a week hiatus there. Unfortunately, I did have a loss in the family. My oldest uncle, Mr. Ronnie Rhodes. I'm going to miss him very much, and I'd like to go ahead and dedicate this podcast to his memory. As always, everybody, thank you very much for all of the support on Apple iTunes with the 5-star ratings, the follows on Spotify, and of course, the likes, comments, and subscriptions over there on YouTube. Everything means a lot here for this podcast, and I really do appreciate everybody's support with it. I appreciate and I read every comment that you guys make, and I try to reply to it as soon as I possibly can as well. I hope you all have enjoyed everything that I've done here with this podcast, but without further ado, this is Cortland, Ohio, 1990. This is an outdoor Thunder Nationals that was not televised, but man, let me tell you, this event is certainly a doozy. There is a lot of stuff going on here with old leaf sprung suspension trucks, iron walling cars, and an outdoor venue. It's just insane. It really is. If you ever get a chance to watch this footage or see this footage at the International Monster Truck and Museum Hall of Fame, do it, because it is very well worth your time. This week we welcome back Mean Duck Productions, Mr. Chris Parrish, onto the show to talk with us. So, let's get right into it. Welcome back to the Retro Monster Truck Review, Cortland, Ohio, 1990. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Retro Monster Truck Review. I want to say thank you, by the way, to everybody that wished mine and my family well after a little bit of a hard time that we went through. We unfortunately lost an uncle, and everything went good this past week. He is laid to rest, and we are ready to go here on this week's episode of the Retro Monster Truck Review. And we're bringing back an old buddy of mine here. You might remember him from the Richmond episode, or as I call it, the Marathon. Mr. Chris Parrish with Mean Duck Productions back on here, and we're talking about something that, I said I would not do non-televised shows, but we got to talking at the last Trigger King race, just kind of bantering back and forth about this particular show in Cortland, Ohio in 1990 that was the stuff of legend, basically, in monster trucks for a very long time. It was available for just a little while on the internet to watch, and then it got pulled down, but I knew you had this stuff, and I was like, man, we should talk about this, because this is a significant race as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the wilder early events. It's hard to think of anything more extreme than this one is. It's a Thunder Nationals event, and a lot of people probably think of Thunder Nationals as indoor, small track, concrete only, iron walling cars.
5 cars, iron walling cars.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where Thunder Nationals, that was really their bread and butter. That's where they usually were. That's how they started. That's how it even ended. However, throughout the summer, you're not always inside. And so Thunder Nationals, Aaron Polburn took the show outside and took over a lot of county fairgrounds and such, and brought an incredible product with a lot of the same competitors, but the show was suddenly on dirt because they're at these fairgrounds, and so they lengthened the tracks out, had
added an extra set of cars.
Yeah, 2 sets of cars, still iron walling both sets of cars, and so it really put on almost double the show, if you will. Double the hits, double the fun.
Yeah, exactly. Double the show, double meant fun. There we go.
They were throwing down in Cortland, Ohio. Yeah. This was June 15th and 16th of 1990. Just to give you some perspective there, you look at some of what the other promoters out there were doing at the time, and this is some of the most entertaining stuff you'll find out there in the industry.
Oh, I agree that this event had it all, and I can remember vaguely hearing about it on Facebook in a Facebook group. People were speaking of this and talking about what happens in day 2. We'll get there, don't worry. But the main thing I remembered hearing was Pony Express doing a slap wheelie in between the cars, like in no man's land, and you're like, wait, Pony Express just did what? I'm hearing about this, and I'm like, hey, what now? And then you hear about what happens in day 2, and your eyes start to bug out of your head. We've got to see clips of this. And then I think it was you that actually put it online at first, and then it was taken down, unfortunately, because of You know how it seems like one person seems to ruin it for everybody kind of thing.
Yeah. I did try to put this up online, amongst other things, on the Action Tracks Retro Tracks series, and most of the stuff I have by the grace of the original owner, and have a certain duty to protect it in their name
Hmm.
and their ownership rights. And we did have issues with people not respecting that, and so the decision was ultimately made just to take it all down, which is unfortunate. However, there are still other ways to see this, and insert shameless plug here, but um, we've also used this footage at the International Monster Truck Museum and Hall of Fame previously. And if you're an old school monster truck fan and love seeing rare old school footage, that's your place to go, because every year we dig through the archives and put some really cool stuff out there, and it's almost every year completely different stuff that's never been seen before. And so get up to the Hall of Fame and enjoy some old school.
Exactly. And I can never plug that venue enough on this podcast. I love the fact that it exists. And shout out to them, by the way. They had a very successful parade here. I believe it was last weekend. They had a really nice parade with all the old school trucks that were in the museum, and they were taking them to the new museum over in Butler, Indiana. And I got to tell you, that was fun to watch. It was cool to see monster trucks on a road, just going down the road. Um, I tell you what, though, that place is really cool. I can't wait to see the new venue when they get it all built, and I can't wait to see the next product. I need to get out to the next Hall of Fame. I really do. I was fortunate enough to attend last year's because it was online and I could sit at home and do it. I haven't ever been to the Hall of Fame. I really want to go, and I want to take this podcast mobile and talk to a few guys there as well.
Well, the grand opening of the brand new facility in Butler is taking place on May 22nd. You can get tickets in advance on, I believe, at monstermuseum.org, and you can also check it out on Facebook. They've got them available there. My understanding is that they'll do plaque presentations for 2020 with the inductees, as well as some old school car crushes, and I even heard something about possibly a new school car crush as well. So I have a feeling no matter what the old school crush is, it's going to be cool anyway.
Well, I have a feeling that you might have to have a passenger when you get up to about Mount Vernon area. I might have to hop in your car and go with you to that one. You're talking old school monster truck car crushing. I literally haven't seen an old school car crush since 1990 in my first show.
Yeah,
So
there's so many trucks being restored. There's a lot of opportunity up there to do some crushes, and so I think it'll almost be guys fist fighting over the opportunity to do it.
exactly.
And hopefully the new facility facilitates such opportunities being more prevalent, to where we can do old school car crushes with some frequency now that the Hall of Fame has its own property. I know there's lots of ideas for expansion and events that can be held, and so it should be exciting to see where it goes from here.
I can't wait to see it. Like I said, I'm definitely going to try to have to get to that particular event because that just sounds like it's going to be an awesome time. But let's get into this though. Here we've got probably one of the biggest rivalries in monster trucks that doesn't quite get the same recognition that I believe that it should as some of the major ones that we hear about in monster truck racing at this show. It might not be Fred Schaefer behind the wheel of Barefoot, but it's definitely one of, if not the best barefoot drivers out there, with Scott Hess behind the wheel. And we got Taurus as well. And you and I have heard a bunch of rumors over the years as to how this rivalry started, what brought it on, the bad blood between it. I personally had heard it was a dispute over one of the trucks that they had, and that's why they had the split that they had. Because for those that don't know, Jack Willman and Fred Schaefer were together for a little while in the early to mid 80s with monster truck racing. And believe it or not, before Taurus was doing the bus crush, it was a Barefoot truck that he was practicing with to do that. And I believe there's still video of that out there, of Barefoot doing the double bus crush with Jack behind the wheel. As far as what led to the falling out, take your pick as far as rumors go on that.
Yeah, Fred and Jack are actually old drag racing buddies, and so they
Mhm.
go way back. They were working together. I mean, they each had their own cars, and then they started working together a little bit. And then they started getting into the off-road scene, and building trucks, and Barefoot started kind of gradually working its way up. And I mean, it was still on 48s or smaller at the time. Um, but I believe it was Fred started basically paying Jack to help keep up with Barefoot, and so that became a natural partnership and developed. And so they were running Barefoot together, um, and eventually had a parting of ways. Now, as you kind of outlined, we hear a lot of different things,
Mhm.
and there have been a lot of different stories throughout the years. Um, there's no whole truth in any one of them. There's probably partial truth in a little bit of everything. Um, but don't believe everything you read. But ultimately,
Exactly.
they decided to part ways. And so Barefoot 1 became Taurus.
Hmm.
And Fred kept the S10, Little Barefoot, and then started building further bare feet from there. But that was the separation, and it was quickly a heated rivalry. They didn't necessarily run together a lot early on, but you're right. Fred and Jack were crushing buses with Barefoot, and Jack was doing the driving in almost all of those situations. Um, and Jack went on to continue with the bus crush thing as well. But as racing became more of a thing in monster trucks, they started running into each other a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and through certain opportunities, they were running together a lot. And so while TV definitely played up some of the rivalry, it was also pretty legit as well. I mean, they
Hmm.
knew what was good TV, but they also didn't like each other very well right then either.
No, they didn't. But it with the split, it actually led into something that's very unique to, I believe, monster truck racing, and that's the fact that you had arguably three of the biggest top teams within 45 minutes of each other in the entire sport. You had Bigfoot over in Hazelwood, Missouri. Then just down the road, you have Fred Schaefer in Pontoon Beach, Illinois. And then even just a little bit farther down the road, Granite City, Illinois, and Fred Schaefer. And the funny thing is when I was on my way to a bunch of RC races, I used to always kind of chuckle to myself because I'd drive right past Granite City, I'd drive right past Pontoon Beach, and I'd end up at the Hazelwood shop at Bigfoot.
The trifecta, and for a long time, there's a lot of dislike in that triangle
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Um, those guys just didn't like each other. They all had their reasons, but they didn't like each other. So there was a lot of competitive spirit going on there, um, and a lot of great teams right next door to each other, which also made St. Louis a bit of a hotbed when it came to a show as well. And there were some wild showdowns in even just St. Louis.
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, St. Louis being the closest venue as far as, hey, we're going to pack a bunch of people in here to see these trucks. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of a rivalry there because they all kind of may have treated that as their hometown.
Oh, definitely. When it came to St. Louis, it was give it all. I mean, there was at least no, there were a couple years, I believe. I think there was a Bigfoot. Forgive me on the numbers. Maybe Bigfoot 7 with Kramer versus Schaefer and the smooth tire truck, a showdown there in
Hmm.
St. Louis, and then
Is that the one
um,
where the door flies off a Barefoot?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the next year, I think it was Kramer in 9 versus Taurus 2. And I mean, you could tell they were giving it everything they've got. They were putting the extra mustard on for the hometown show and the rival. And so it was USHRA that did it, and they were
Hmm.
playing it well.
Well, let's talk real quick about the actual Barefoot Truck that is at this show. This is Scott Hess behind the wheel, and if you don't know who Scott Hess is, look him up because the man can drive the wheels off of a monster truck. And at this particular event, he's driving the front tires off of it. He's driving the rear tires off of it. It is one of, if not the most amazing weekends one guy can put together. Talk a little bit about this Barefoot Truck and what you know of it.
Well, this Barefoot Truck, little history. Scott Hess came from Hercules. He had his beautiful maroon Hercules custom truck that he built up,
Which
and
was just redone for the Hall of Fame, by the way, and looks
yes.
amazing.
Conveniently, both this Barefoot and Hercules are on display at the Hall of Fame. Have been restored or regenerated and are on display at the Hall of Fame. But Hess's Hercules, he struck up a deal with Fred. Fred needed more bare feet, and Hess was just the guy to represent the brand. So they made Hercules into a Barefoot for a short amount of time, and then built the two new Barefoot trucks. The one that would go on to be known as the smooth tired truck. That was Fred's truck, and Scott's this truck, basically. There was a prior paint scheme on it with a big bow tie on the side. But same truck, and actually those two trucks are very near siblings. Like they were talking to each other constantly when they were building them. They're basically the same truck with minor differences to constructor preference. And so very similar trucks. And while you see certain traits that were similar, they also acted very differently between those two trucks. But Hess just drove the wheels off of this truck all the time. This was his best truck in his career, and it also ends up being his last truck in his career. And this truck ended, well, in a way, this truck goes on to become Dabney's blue giant truck that we see in the 91 Penda series, I think. However, that said, Hess had a big crash up in Montreal and flipped the truck over backwards, back onto its wheels. But I can't remember the exact phrase he used, but it was like triangled the frame. Basically, he pushed one frame rail a good 6 inches forward from the other frame rail. Ooh. And so that frame was toast. They basically built up a exact replica of that frame and took everything else from that Barefoot and made it giant. Mm-hmm. So it was an all new frame. Everything else was old Barefoot. So that's kind of a little bit of the lineage there. But yes, Dynamite Barefoot, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But Aaron Polburn, the promoter and the announcer in this event, kind of starts throwing out some stats, and he may have embellished for audience enjoyment reasons just a little bit, but not a whole lot. I mean,
I thought I heard 31-1 at one point in there as a stat that was thrown out.
Yeah,
I don't remember which show it was on. I want to say it was the second show. I heard that stat get tossed out, but he's talking about the winter series, of course, before we get into this summer series. And this summer series, I got to tell you, if this is the competition that they were having every weekend in here, makes you wonder how come none of it was on television.
I know.
This was insane.
That's one of the interesting. It's good that you bring up that point, because people see the television broadcast and kind of think that's the pinnacle of the industry and everything that was going on. And it can be a good representative, and a lot of good events and competition was taking place on TV, but it wasn't everything. Like Thunder Nationals is that brand that, as we've done more research and more of this video is surfacing, we're realizing this really was just an all-star promotion and an event going on every week. And these are some of the toughest trucks on the planet, because these guys are iron walling these cars at full speed every time, multiple times throughout each event. And the trucks are generally holding up. I think you put a lot of other trucks in here, and this show is going to go downhill because they're just not as strong as these trucks have built up to be. Because Aaron had kind of a core group of guys that he used and kind of rotated in and out. And so when he went to outdoor events and brought in slightly bigger lineups, expanding to 6 or 8 trucks, or really expanding to like 8 trucks, he could draw more from that pool, if you will, and create still really stout lineups. And I think we've got a lot of that here.
Oh, we certainly do. We've got trucks that were around in the beginning mixed with trucks that are freshly built for 1990 in this event that we have here. Day one, in the first clip that we have. Oh, by the way, before I get there, you mentioned iron walling. I want to verify this, so anybody that's new listening to this that may not be into a lot of the retro stuff, iron walling means there's no dirt ramps in front of these cars. They're literally hitting the side of a fresh car in qualifying, and they are beating this track down. One lane's going to have a little bit more of an advantage than the other necessarily because of how much this is all going to get beat down.
Yeah, this is monster trucks T-boning automobiles. I mean, they are broadsiding these suckers, and so you basically build your own ramp just by trucks repeatedly hitting. So the first truck out kind of has a disadvantage because you're hitting fresh meat, and it's going to launch you higher up, and it's going to be compacting and absorbing your momentum and your energy. And so you kind of progressively see the show and the races get faster and faster as you work through the bracket. Not to mention, theoretically, you're eliminating slower trucks. So you've got fast trucks getting faster as we go, which also breeds a lot of excitement.
Speaking of excitement, I believe you said day one here. The first clip that I see in the footage that I have, that you sent to me, by the way, thank you for that, is Pony Express, or excuse me, Excalibur. But you said beforehand, I believe it was Pony Express that was actually out first that hit these cars. And until this particular race, I don't think I had ever seen Pony Express run all that hard, other than a TNT event where it's in the finals a couple of times against Dennis and Digger. But here,
very different event too.
Yeah, very different.
Very different styles. And so, yeah, that's one of those things where the Thunder Nationals kind of brought out different sides of people, or different tracks help different trucks work well. Pony Pony often ran the Thunder Nationals series. Maybe not every event, but it was a common appearance. And even with that short little Mustang, he'd stand the truck up. There are a number of clips out there where Pony's got some wild rides. And Cortland is a good example of Pony kind of being normal Pony Express there, where he hits the cars, and between it's a short wheelbase truck, and so it rebounds and power into a wheelie. The truck stands it almost straight up. Something you never would have expected based on anything you had seen on TV before.
Yeah, if you had seen this on TV, your eyes might have popped out of your head. If you're watching this live, like the people of Cortland, who are the only people that really knew that this existed outside of anybody that was there within the industry at the time, I can't imagine what the reaction was like. I do know a little bit later when we see this same thing from another truck that you can hear the reaction of the crowd, and it's insane to listen to. It makes you wish you were there for that environment, just to be able to hear that. There are some shows that you see on TV that you wish you could be there in a crowd to experience it.
Oh, definitely. And this is one of those just dynamite events. I would argue that, and I would not argue this for every event either. I would argue that you could throw this show in front of fans of today's monster trucks, and they would still be
very entertained.
Yes, different product, but it would be an entertainment value nonetheless, just by the scale of what these guys are doing in this event.
And note, this is not 10 scale. That was an RC joke. Anyway.
Hey.
Like I said, the first clip that I see in the footage that you sent me is Charlie Pauken and Excalibur making a qualifying pass. Fairground show, you see Excalibur out there, and the suspension on that truck is still just insane for even 1990. I still contest this truck could have ran very well in TNT in 88 and 89. Maybe not so much 90 at that point, but at the same time, this truck in this lineup is still one that you would not want to be reckoned with. And this iron wall in these cars, Pauken has a really good run. A lot of smoke pours out of the left side of the truck, though, on the
Yeah.
landing. Not sure what that was, but the truck does come back and compete. I'm assuming maybe it just popped the dipstick a little bit and some oil got on the headers. I'm not sure. But a lot of smoke there for Excalibur, but they get it fixed and it does come back a little bit later.
Yeah, yeah. A good run to open it up. Very Excalibur run, smooth, kind of playing up, keeping momentum with the light bounces, like they're controlled Excalibur bounces. That was kind of their thing with the leaf springs. It
Yeah,
seemed
with
to.
the Excalibur bounce, it was a minimal bounce, and that's what really
Yeah,
helped it. That's where the suspension came in. However, there are trucks being made around this time that are taking away the minimal bounce.
yeah, yeah. The sport was still very much evolving and evolving fairly quickly at that point, and would show more later on. From Excalibur, we go into Nightmare, another strong leaf truck.
Hmm.
Hess.
And one of the best looking Leaf trucks too, by the way. I love Nightmare.
Oh yeah. And Steve Hess, always a nice guy. Had some of the best looking trucks, lots of detail, and he ran the truck hard.
Hmm.
I think sometimes the type of track sort of affected how the truck worked. But in this situation, the truck was looking pretty good. He laid down a smooth pass, probably just a touch slower than Excalibur.
It was a pass just like Excalibur's as far as I was concerned. It was a little bit slower. The one thing that I noted from it was the absolute textbook pop and drop that he does on the first car stack. Just perfect, lands it, guns it, and you hear the truck. It doesn't sound like he shifts to third at all. He stays in second through no man's land. After all, it is just qualifying at this point, and he has a flawless run over the second set of cars. But that first pop and drop, and anybody, again, if you don't know what pop and drop is, that's popping the front tires up, landing them perfectly on the cars, and just driving straight off of them. It's a really good pass for Nightmare right there, as far as I was concerned. It was calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah, yeah. And as we move into the third qualifying run, you've got Four Wheel Crazy, another good, strong leaf sprung truck. Kind of takes the same approach, I think. He
Takes the
kind
same
of.
approach. It's also built probably more for the race at this point. The Four Wheel Crazy is a truck that you would see later on in USHRA stealing a few upset wins here and now and then on television. But here, I don't know what it is this weekend. It just seems like it's a little bit off.
Yeah, the truck just seemed a little off its game. It just didn't have the usual Four Wheel Crazy show. But I will say, through the first three runs, you start to see sort of a trend showing up in qualifying, attacking this track. They come up and they kind of pop up, land sort of mid stack in the first set, and then sort of bound off and power down through the no man's land and hit the second obstacle
Yeah,
and
it's
land
definitely the calm
somewhere
before
towards
the
the
storm.
sixth car. It's four cars in the first set, 8 cars in the second set, and so landed towards the sixth car or so. And so we're kind of seeing that as a routine so far.
Yeah, definitely. Taurus 2 is out next, though, and this is where the business picks up as far as I'm concerned, as far as qualifying goes. First three passes have been relatively tame, and Jack Sr. picks that pace up a bit with his first launch, bringing the front tires past the first set of cars, landing into a slap wheelie. Literally, I think because the suspension is what it is on Taurus 2, the way he landed, there was no way he was going to prevent going into a slap wheelie here with that landing. Because as soon as he hits, you hear the throttle, the truck comes up onto the rear tires. He's bouncing it really hard to try to get across the finish line at that point. I mean, it's a wild pass, and you could clearly hear the crowd wake up on that one.
Yeah, I mentioned those first three passes and the approach kind of on purpose that way, because I knew Jack was coming, and Senior took a more aggressive approach. You could tell he was setting the tone for the night. Taurus 2 is going to be a major contender, if not the contender. But it was also very much the start of the wildness that was coming for the night. As Jack, Taurus 2 was known to be bouncy, but had a great big motor as well. And so he had that big slap wheelie and carried it and drove across the finish line. But that leads us on.
Yeah, speaking of slap wheels and going across the finish line, my goodness, Scott Hess and Barefoot right here takes a high jump over the first set of cars, lands, and does a move. And I'll compare this to Charlie Paulk in later years in Monster Jam when he does a slap wheelie into another obstacle. This is exactly what Hess does right here. He lands, slap wheelies all the way through no man's land, lands the front tires back on the cars, and then just guns it straight across them. It's a wild qualifying pass, and it's almost like monkey see, monkey do, or I see what you can do. I'm going to go out there and do it better. This also the crowd goes completely nuts for.
Yeah, that was all right, Jack. I'll see you and I'll raise. In very much that Scott Hess style. You talk about things you think of when you watch that run. I feel like there are a number of things for me. One was that was neat, Gary Lee,
Yeah.
from the Wild Foot wheelie run. But also, I guess try to put this in perspective for people that haven't seen the video and are listening here. Dennis Anderson on the indoor events with the bumping cars that TNT ran kind of developed a habit of coming over that first set and nosing in and wheeling up a little bit, and he just barely kick the rear tires over by great. Yeah, but he's barely clearing the front tires under those cars. In this case, Hess has got a full-blown looking at the sky wheelie going on.
He's dragging the tailgate here.
Yeah. I mean, this different time, but this is a bigger wheelie than Brass had in Wildfoot. And same way, he carried it right across the cars. And so no matter who you were at that time, if you were carrying the front wheels across the cars and tripping it with the rear wheels, you were a special dude. I mean, you had some guts that most other guys didn't. And so to be in that club, Scott Hess is fitting, and he's showing it off here in Cortland.
And that's not just the only time we've ever seen Scott Hess do this. There's a particular event, I want to say it might be even later this year in 1990 in Indianapolis, that gets a lot of play from television because you see Hess. I'll put it this way. If you can find that particular event from Indianapolis and you want to watch it and you want to see a leaf-sprung truck go out and legitimately beat Bigfoot 8, that's the event that you need to watch.
That was my home event, actually. Mm-hmm. I was at that show. First time I ever saw Barefoot.
Every time I get somebody on this show that talks about a legendary event they were at, I'm just over here almost wanting to pout. I couldn't go to it.
Well, I'm glad I could help. I was very fortunate in Indianapolis being my home show. I didn't get any fair shows or anything, but I did get major events like the Jamborees and the Hoosier Dome events. Mm-hmm. But yes, I saw Scott Hess take down the brand new Bigfoot 8 and Brass, which just kind of blew my very young mind. And the fact that it is a television broadcast, you can find it out there. Challenge of Power, 1989, Indianapolis, Indiana. Check it out. It's wild.
That's right. It was before the Racer Stripes on 8, so it was in late 89.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was November approximately 10th. That's usually the weekend that it would have been. Basically the time that we have the Hall of Fame every year now.
Okay. So all every year the Hall of Fame is just a celebration of a leaf for taking down Bigfoot 8. Okay.
That's exactly what it is.
You hear that, Jason Rowan? No, I'm kidding.
Yep. But I mean that rounds out qualifying, and we didn't see a few trucks in there that we'll see later that they just weren't filmed for whatever reason, because that's the way that old home video archives go. Mm-hmm. But
round one here, we get an interesting matchup to start things off, though. And the last time I spoke of a matchup like this, Buffalo, New York, 1987, with Colby Marshall when he was on the show. Same two trucks that were at that event are squaring off right here, Excalibur and Giant, though they look very different, and it's no longer Duraline or Giant at this point. It's just Giant. And I got to tell you, this is just cool to see even in 1990.
Oh, yeah. And Giant, I think, doesn't get the credit that it deserves, because on TV, it was always a very slow, lumbering. It was the Durliner Giant. It was an early truck. It was a car crusher, but they continued to tweak on it, and then they also ran it hard. And so the truck was still going to be 16,000 pounds. It was a heavy big boy, but it held up well, and they could just. It was almost like the tanks in some ways. It could cream through the cars when everybody else has to jump up the cars.
Exactly. And so this truck plowed through them, whereas other trucks jumped completely sky high over them.
Yes, and that allowed the truck to be a much better competitor than you'd expect for what it was if you watched other TV racing broadcasts. That did not make it a winner every event, but there were some events that it won, some events that it didn't win, all in the same format. And so
as far as Thunder Nationals goes, it makes it a strong competitor inside of a smaller arena because you're plowing through the car like we were talking instead of flying over it. A one jump hit is exactly where this truck keeps even with Excalibur. It's in no man's land where things change and the suspension on Excalibur kicks in. Hawken takes off, and that's where it leaves Giant in the dust. But if this is just a one jump straight line track on the outdoors, like what we see out there, it's a tight race.
Yeah,
I don't know who wins that.
Yeah, that would have been a tight one over one set of cars. But yeah, you're right. The superior suspension of Excalibur shined through. Now, speaking of other old school trucks, we move to the next race, and another old school truck that you would not expect to do very well in this sort of format. You've got Goliath, the dual-engine beast.
Dual-engine beast Goliath taking on Taurus number 2. And I got to tell you, in this particular race, I got to give kudos to Alan Tura because I don't think I've ever seen the front tires or the rear tires of Taurus get as high as they did on that first set of cars. That truck launched. And I can only imagine what that felt like on landing for poor Alan inside the cab of that big beast.
Now, don't get us wrong. This was never actually a race, but Alan may have had all 4 tires off the ground at the same time in Goliath, which is impressive for Goliath. I mean,
yes.
Taurus was still crossing the finish line, and Goliath was nowhere near the second set of cars.
Honestly, I think that's because of the landing on the first set of cars that it had. It got pretty high up there. I've never seen that truck get that high. When I legit watched this back earlier today, I was like, oh, wow, I just never remembered seeing that truck get that high before, with the exception of one car crush where it stands straight up onto the nose and it sits there for a minute, which used to be in the clip, I believe it was it Monster Truck Challenge? When USHRA took over.
Oh, yeah, the Pittsburgh
that stand-up wheelie Goliath. Right there, and they only showed the front view of that. You never really
couldn't tell what truck it was, unless you saw the original.
And I think that's why they used it, because you can't tell what truck it is. But at the same time, it was insane to watch that wheel stand, and I still remember him getting out of the cab and almost kissing the top of the truck after that, because that's a scary situation that he was in that particular moment in time. And I think he was thinking the same thing whenever he landed, and probably kissed the steering wheel on the landing of that launch that he has here over these cars.
Yeah, definitely. And so Tura came out, he made his run. He gave it a good shot. I mean, he gave it all that you could expect from Goliath, but
in all honesty, on paper and in real racing situation, that Taurus 2 truck's going to walk away from it every single time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think it's also worth pointing out that Jack didn't have quite the same bounce that he did in qualifying. The cars are getting more beat down. The truck was responding better, and he looked good and fast and smooth.
Yeah. Very smooth, very fast run here from Taurus, and that's something to note for a little bit later on. Next race, though, Barefoot and Pony Express, and I just got to say, the only thing I thought of when I watched this race, I didn't even type notes the first time I watched this, because normally I'll pause it after the first set, and then I'll go on and I'll get the rest of the race. This one, you couldn't pause it because your jaw was on the ground.
Yeah, these are my archives, and so I've seen all this stuff before, and there are still some things that never cease to amaze me. And I watched this one race, and my response is not fitting for this broadcast, because I was overwhelmed by what I just watched from Scott Hess.
Yes.
And we use the phrase race. I know you say it's against Pony Express, but in the view that we have, in the angle that we have, you'd never know that Pony Express was there.
You
You
wouldn't even
never
know it
see the
existed.
truck.
Exactly.
And I don't know if you agree, but looking at Hess, he jumps the first set of cars, barely clips the downside of the fourth car, and it's almost like the truck slingshots. It gains so much momentum.
It
And then
slingshots, and it
just
almost looks like he's
launches.
about to do another wheel stand, but the front end comes down, and literally just right within an inch before it hits that last set of cars, that first car in that set, it touches the ground with the front tires. And it's almost like that is like a trampoline. If you ever been a kid on a trampoline and jumping up and down and you get that double bounce from somebody bouncing
To
you
the
and launching you in the air,
moon.
that's exactly what happens here. He flies over these cars. And before we got into this broadcast, before we got into the recording, we were talking about USA 1 in Milwaukee. Okay, if you've ever seen the USA 1 Milwaukee event where the truck is just launching and jumping past all these cars, there are some factors there for that truck to get that far. There's a nice dirt jump there. There's a set of 12 cars. USA 1's landing about 12, 13 cars deep, maybe 14 in some cases. This truck is doing that here off an iron wall hit.
This is just an incredible launch. I mean, when you put it into perspective, it's incredible. And the way the Barefoot truck worked for Scott, it was prone to do this sort of thing, but even this stands out above pretty much everything else. The truck just catapulted off of that second set of cars. And it wasn't even so much the distance. Like, it was totally, I mean, it is the distance, but it was combined with the fact he could have jumped over his own truck underneath him. He had so much
rebound
air
like
off under the truck off of that launch. And so we had 12 cars cleared probably here, landing on the front end.
But and then he lands and pops the left rear tire off on the landing.
For the suspension on that truck being a fairly tight leaf spring truck, the fact that that landing went as well as it did is kind of remarkable. He blew the tire off. I mean, the truck got awfully out of shape, but it gathered itself up real quick. And I think blowing that bead off helped because it dissipated some of the energy.
Yeah, it dissipated some of the energy off of the truck. Because I think if it slams down on the rear the way that it did from that nosedive, no telling where that energy goes if that tire doesn't pop the way that it did. Just for sake here, this truck hits these cars, launches through the air like you probably have never seen a monster truck do before, starts to nose over, and then when it lands on the nose, it pops that rear end down, and that's the force that just drives that air straight out of that tire. I mean, it's an incredible launch. If you ever get the chance to see just this pass from this weekend, it's well worth it. That's the price of admission right there for day one, as far as I'm concerned, is that pass.
Oh yeah, that was glorious. And then everything you got with it on top of that is just amazing. But the one thing that I will note out of round number one, and I guess we're not out of round number one yet, but so far we are definitely setting the tone for the top trucks. Which trucks are going to be the competitors going on. And we've got one more race that was not actually in the filmed version that we had to discuss, but there's also Four Wheel Crazy taking on Nightmare, two probably reasonably evenly matched trucks. Four Wheel Crazy, maybe a little bit newer, and like we said earlier,
a little bit newer, maybe a little bit softer suspension. I'm going to say they're probably about the same in the motor department.
And in this situation, Four Wheel Crazy does take that victory and moves himself into round number two. One of the interesting things about the Outdoor Thunder Nationals event, indoors they'd run freestyle and then they'd run racing. Well, they're not running freestyle here. And so I think some of the idea to extend the show, we've seen it probably before at some of your local shows, they run a consolation bracket.
Yeah, it's almost, you can compare it to a double elimination bracket to an extent.
Yeah.
But as we move on here, as far as the Conci bracket goes, we don't get to see Nightmare defeat Giant.
Pretty handily.
Yes.
Nightmare takes that one down, which if Giant really hitting things perfectly, it could be a really good race. But if he's not, Nightmare's probably going to take it, and that's kind of what happened here.
Yeah. And then the next one, Pony Express defeats Giant.
Yeah, yeah. It was
Giant's
a good
going back to
race.
back, basically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they basically brought the truck straight back up to the line and raced it again. And it was a pretty good race. Pony pulled away in no man's land. Giant was probably a little lower geared as well, and also just weighed more than Pony.
Oh yeah,
Um,
probably twice as much as Pony at this point. That truck is incredibly heavy.
and at this point, sun has set and we've gone dark.
Yep, I was
Uh,
just about ready to say that. As soon as that gets over with, excuse me, as soon as the race that we had beforehand with Barefoot, it just cuts away and you see darkness has set in, and that's really the telltale sign because this is probably what, a Saturday night,
I
or maybe
believe
this
this
is a
was
Friday.
Friday night. Yeah.
Almost puts you in the mind of a short track race.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, this is kind of this is for those dirt track racers that race Friday and then go somewhere else on Saturday, and some of that will prove true later as we discuss through this.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, June 15th and 16th of 1990. That would be a Friday and a
And a
Saturday.
Saturday. Okay.
Um, so this is Friday night action, setting the tone
Friday
up
night
hot on Friday.
semifinal round here. And this one is a heavyweight battle no matter where it's at. If it was in the USHRA, if it was a TNT, I don't care. This one could be a final anywhere. That's Excalibur and Taurus 2.
I
And
would
I
pay
tell
to
you,
watch this match alone.
exactly. This
Anywhere. You put them on any track, even make it. I'd love to see them on a best of on a best of 5 or something on different tracks. This would be a fabulous race in almost every situation.
and it's in a fabulous race right here. And one thing to note here is Taurus 2 gets some of the biggest air I've seen off of a first set of cars in quite some time. Jumps and practically clears the first set of cars, and literally you see Willman just bouncing. The funny thing is the truck lands, bounces, and stays straight. And I'm going to throw a thing out here, Jason Rono, like this. It looks like a J Concepts regulator truck. When it jumps, lands, bounces completely straight, right into the second set of cars, and goes on to take the win here over Excalibur. But heck, Palkin is in the other lane, and because of that big bounce that Taurus takes, that's where the suspension of Excalibur kicks in, because when it lands, it's on the throttle and ready to go, whereas Taurus, even though it had that big launch, Excalibur's able to catch up to him in no man's and makes it a lot closer than it probably should have been.
Yeah, these were definitely two very contrasting styles in their approach to this race. Jack launched the truck off of that first obstacle. I mean, he probably cleared 5 cars easy with a big Taurus bounce in the middle, whereas Excalibur comes off the line and kind of reverts back to what we were seeing in qualifying and kind of bounds onto the center of that first obstacle
Mm-hmm.
and then gets down smooth and powers it down. And so all of a sudden he's Jack's ahead because of that big leap and all that momentum, but he's losing momentum as he's bouncing, and
Yeah, he's
Excalibur's
losing the
gaining. He's got the
momentum.
power on the ground. And so it's actually a really good race when they hit the second obstacle, and Willman in the Taurus truck wins, but not by a lot. And if it had been a little bit longer race, I think momentum might have carried Excalibur towards the win there.
Yeah, if it had been a 10-car final set, I'm pretty sure Excalibur would get the win by the front bumper of the truck.
It was exciting, and that's a perfect example of why I'd love to watch a series of races just between those two trucks.
Exactly. Put them back to the line, let them go again. And after that one, as far as I was concerned, tell the crowd, oh, it was a dead heat. We got to let them go again. Next race, Barefoot, four-wheel crazy. Arguably the smoothest pass from qualifying came out of four-wheel crazy. However, it wasn't the fastest. And I would say that Barefoot's bonsai slap wheelie run was probably the fastest of the bunch, because there was really no interruption between in no man's land, even though it was doing a wheel stand.
In this race, yeah, four wheel crazy looked smooth, and Hess, I'm not even sure what to make of this because he almost
This was
makes
the
it
one
look
time the
effort.
truck looked weak the entire night. It had a really weird bounce that Hess had to recover from in no man's
Yeah,
land, and it didn't look like what we had seen the previous couple of passes.
it was not a smooth out of control pass like some of his other passes. This was he cleared the first set almost it seemed easily, but the truck nosed over really hard.
Yeah, it did what it
And it
did.
kicked the rear
It
back
did what it
down.
did off the second set, off the first set in this pass. So
Yes, yes. But like you said, he tamed it down and kind of almost drove over the second set of cars. Not slowly, it was still kind of bouncing, and he was trying to keep the speed up. But he drove across the surface of the second set of cars to the victory fairly
mhm.
easily by probably two truck lengths.
Yeah, just about that. Then we go into the Conci Championship here, and we get Nightmare and Pony Express, and the way it looked in the video when I first looked at this, I thought this was like another part of round two, maybe, but then you had to explain to me this is actually the Conci Championship, aka you're probably your third place race.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that you watch this and you see kind of why Aaron and the Thunder Nationals crew may have been doing this, because it really did add to the show. And so all of a sudden you've got two reasonably well-matched trucks with leaf-sprung technology, probably of maybe a similar weight, facing off against each other. And it's really a good race.
Yeah, it's a great race here. We get Nightmare actually getting the whole shot on Pony Express, but Pony Express closes the gap through no man's land, much like Excalibur was doing earlier against Taurus 2. But this time, it closes the gap enough. And might I say, awesome sky wheelie from Pony Express here.
Yeah, over the second
Flying
set of
sky
cars.
wheelie, lands nose first ahead of Nightmare, which going into that race, I'm thinking, oh, Nightmare's got this.
He passed it, or wait. Pull out some old school nerd. Pony Express is doing
Doing
it
it
in the
in the
air.
air. Monster
That's
Madness
where he
2, live on
passed. Yeah,
forever.
baby. Army Armstrong life.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah,
But man,
Pony.
that flying wheelie from Pony Express was something that I just had never seen this truck particular do. And it does it, it lands, and you're almost thinking, oh great, here comes the endo at the end. And he bounces up onto the nose, but the truck comes back down, rides right out of
Powered
it,
out. Yeah.
and he
I
powers
mean,
right out of it.
I didn't see that wheelie coming the way he hit the obstacle, but that nose rose right up, and it was a very forward momentum flying wheelie, but the nose was way up in the air, but yeah, it carried him to the victory just barely, just barely.
Honestly, it
Great
reminded
race.
me of and I don't remember the venue it was at, but I remember the race. It was High Voltage and Ecology Eliminator in the final round of this particular event. And the launch was very similar to what High Voltage had. You see the truck just flying wheel stand, it lands, and then there's a rollover at the end of the track for High Voltage.
Oh yeah, that was in Spokane, Washington, I believe. Yep. Yeah.
That's what that launch reminded me of. Not quite as far as what High Voltage went in the air with the wheelie, and not quite as much momentum, but a very similar launch.
Which is also probably what kept Pony on all four wheels,
Yes.
because
Had
they
there been a
both
lot more
clipped
speed
that
right
last
there,
car. Like they both clipped the last car, and it set the nose down. Only when Painter and High Voltage did it, the nose came up over much more dramatically, and it sent the rear end
nose
up a
came
lot
over
more.
more dramatically. He wasn't as centered as Pony Express was on the cars, so he was riding on the right front, whereas Pony had both front tires pulling.
Yes, yes.
Now, in my notes here for the final, the first thing that popped into my mind was another Army thing, but it wasn't necessarily Army saying it. It was either Gary Lee, Scott Douglas, or Richard Lee. Goes, this is what they all came to see, Army.
Well, and as soon as you started describing that right there, my thought also came back to old Army Armstrong quotes, and I thought, well, this is like walking into a dark room and grabbing a bear.
Yeah,
And, well, you did in a literal sense, but also following the Armyism, these are both bears.
yeah, exactly.
And this is going to be a showdown. I think you can also hear Aaron Polburn in the background building it up and basically just saying, this is going to be brutal.
Yeah.
These guys are going to lay it down. They've been, you can kind of feel it building all night. The one-upsmanship, trying to get a little ground on the other. And here it comes to fruition. The two best-looking trucks of the night on the track are here in the finals, and two teams that just don't like each other.
You flat out don't like each other. I tell you what, though, this race right here is won over the first set of cars, as far as I'm concerned. We see the launch that Taurus gets over this first set of cars, and it's higher than the previous launch that it had, which
It's huge air.
indicates even more of a bounce in no man's land when it lands. And that's right when Hess just scoots right past him.
Yeah.
Hess actually takes it fairly easy for Hess over the first set of cars, and then he just scoots right past the bouncing Taurus in no man's land to go take the win here by a little more than a truck length. It's a very close final. It's a lot of air from both trucks, and it's an insane watch.
Yeah. To say he took it easy, we can't play it down too much because they were both after it. But Hess looked like he was driving with his head a little bit. He was driving hard. He's driving with his head. He also landed really well in no man's land. They both cleared the cars. But Jack,
his landing was very well. Willman's landing was all four tires flat land.
They both flat land.
He kept flat land bouncing all the way through no man's.
I mean, Taurus could have bounced over a 2-car set there in the middle of the track if it had needed to. And you're right. That's where Barefoot got the power back down by hitting the landing just right in no man's land and powering to the victory. Like you said, about a truck length, little truck and a half maybe. But really good race. I mean, you can see the smoke coming out of the headers on both trucks. They are laying it down.
They're putting the coal to the wood.
Right. That was a great Friday night match.
Speaking of Friday night, we ended off right there with a great Friday night final. We go into day 2, though. It's a whole different ball game.
Things are about to shake it up.
You're definitely going to see a lot of shaking up here. We start off again when the video picks up with Excalibur making a pass over the cars in qualifying. Pawkin's pretty smooth. Same thing could be said for Nightmare right after that, as well as Four Wheel Crazy. Then all of a sudden,
here comes a new challenger.
There's a little arcade sound going off in your head right there.
Mm-hmm.
Because something looks different about Taurus tonight.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer. It's a little bit shorter, and it has a completely different frame underneath of it. It looked like they built a truck overnight.
Yeah, I mean, something wild definitely happened. And the driver is no longer a senior; it's now
he's a
junior.
Like we went back in time here. Doc Brown, ladies and gentlemen, visited us the night before.
Right. So I know we're playing games here, but so what happens is all of a sudden we had Taurus 2 on Friday night, but for Saturday, Taurus 3 comes rolling in. Where did this come from?
Exactly. This is something that nobody probably was expecting, and one can only wonder what the conversation was like in the pits whenever they heard that thing fire up and start to be pulled out of the trailer.
So, knowing a little bit of the background here, Jack wasn't happy with Friday night.
I can't imagine why.
There had been some mouth running amongst everybody, and so Jack wasn't happy with Friday night. And so, if I recall correctly, Jackie had a Friday night show, but was heading home on Saturday. And so Jack pulls out the cinder block sized brick phone, cellular phone, and calls Jackie, get it up here. Well, okay. And so
always
Jackie
what Dad says.
Overnights in with Taurus 3 basically. And Jack decides he's going to show old Barefoot what's up, I think. And
I think that as soon as that truck pulls in and it gets pulled out of the hauler, immediately Scott Hess is put on notice.
Oh, yeah. I feel like I pull out a lot of old TV references, but it's kind of like Bloomsburg in '91 when they've got the Dirty Dozen and Fred Schaefer rolls in as the 12th and Army's playing it up. And you got the one bad hombre rolling in as the number 12. Well, this is kind of that same situation where all of a sudden you've got you had a bad hombre, and now you've got the baddest hombre right there. And this truck at this point is cutting edge. There's nothing else out there like it.
With the exception of Bigfoot 8. Nothing else like it out there. But this truck is completely different from 8. It's two different philosophies right there between Bigfoot 8 and Taurus 3.
Well, also, this is June 16th of 1990. Bigfoot 8 doesn't debut for another 3+ months at the Jamboree. Bigfoot 8's still in testing. I think at this point, if I'm not mistaken, they're still trying to finalize, maybe just starting to test with 8. So this is still
8 had been running in 1990, long before this.
Oh no, you're right. You're right. No, I've got I was thinking of 89.
You're thinking 89.
This time 89.
That's all
eight
staying
still
in the
being
show,
developed. Yeah, you're correct. No, I would actually argue that at this point in 1990, as I jump forward a year via my DeLorean, that Equalizer and Bigfoot 8 are definitely on the level of Taurus 3, though Taurus 3 weighed in at like 7,900 pounds, I believe.
Taurus 3 is the reason there was weight limits introduced later in monster truck racing.
Yeah, and basically what they ended up doing was getting, I think it was lead formed that they could shove down the main rails of the chassis to add the weight. But yeah, this truck is light, and one of very few trucks in 1990 where there's similar competition.
Yes.
So yeah, Taurus 3 rolls in, and things are about to light up.
When you see Taurus 3 roll in here, you're thinking, all right, who's running second? Honestly, that's what I'm thinking whenever I see this truck come in here. But when you watch the qualifying pass here, truck's pretty stiff. It has a really bad bounce off the first set of cars and has an equally bad bounce off the second set of cars in the qualifying pass that it makes.
Yeah. It kind of, you watch the truck roll into the starting gates, and you're like, oh boy, this is going to be problems. And then you watch the qualifying pass, and you kind of see that there's a chink in the armor.
There's a real chink in the armor right there. But honestly, looking at what we would see later on to this, I don't think there was a chink at all. I think they were just sandbagging a little bit.
Well, the thing about Taurus 3, because of that big squishy suspension, the way that the coilovers work, they just traveled a lot on that truck. It was a very floppy bunny sort of setup. And so the truck didn't iron wall well. You could see it before in other situations. I'm trying to think of ones that people may have seen, but in some of the old USA videos, like Monster Truck Bloopers, I think there were videos of Kansas City where Taurus 3 actually raced Taurus 2, and there was an iron wall set of cars in there, and Taurus 2 ends up winning because it was fresh meat in that situation, and Taurus 3 really couldn't hit the cars like that. They didn't mash as well because the truck weighed 7,900 pounds. There's nothing that was going to squash the cars down. And so this, I think, had a certain air of that, where the cars were still kind of fresh, because we got new cars for the second night, which is very cool as well. So new cars for the second night, and they're still kind of crushing those down. And I think Taurus had to feel out the track a little bit there, and we'll see the truck get faster and faster as the cars get more and more squashed.
Yes. Also to note, and I know it's a different driver behind the wheel, it's Jack Jr. now. Taurus is actually in a lane it wasn't in the night before, and that's the same situation that we have here for Barefoot, who is now in the near lane. And as far as I'm concerned, with the camera that I have, is actually from the pits, so I consider that the near lane, closest to me. Barefoot's in that lane now, and Barefoot really doesn't have as good of a run either. It makes you think, oh, maybe there's a little bit of a chink in that armor as well.
It definitely wasn't as spectacular as the qualifying run from the night before, where he wheelied it the entire way. And he kind of, I guess it's a 5-car set, and I take that back. I was thinking it was 4, maybe 5 cars. But he kind of does what we were talking about in the qualifying passes from the day before. He kind of lands softly on the middle of the cars and bounds off, and it just doesn't have all that Scott Hess feel, where it
doesn't
looks
have
like
the Scott Hess feel for about the first three quarters of the track, and then the landing, he kicks way off to the right.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, there he is. Okay.
It still had the bounce. Yeah.
It still has that really bad bounce at the end right there. Before Barefoot goes, though, we do hear the announcer say Taurus ran a 771. around the track, which it may have looked bumpy as heck for Taurus. That's still very fast for this particular course.
Relative to the competition, I definitely agree. I caught that number as well, and I was really hoping to hear the Barefoot number just to be able to compare. But we didn't actually get it in the video that we had, because it would have been cool to see the rundown of times just to compare those two different trucks.
It makes you wish this was broadcast on television so you could get a little bit more detail as far as what the qualifying times actually were. I think Taurus is probably your number one qualifier. I'm not sure. I think it was an 8.93 was a time that I heard from Nightmare the previous day.
Okay.
In the first broadcast. So 771, still a second quicker than what I heard from the Leaf Sprung truck before. So kudos to the Taurus team for going out there and setting that fast time. Round one here starts off, though, with Giant and Excalibur. A very bouncy pass for both of these behemoths that competed, like I said, back in '87 against each other. But Pawkins still has the advantage over him with that suspension, goes on to take a win.
Pretty easy win, really. I mean, Pawkin looked pretty good, and so you'd think he's going to be a strong challenger, if not capable of being in the finals. He could easily take the win. The way these trucks work and the way they bounce over these tracks, I'd say Excalibur is absolutely in the discussion for the victory. But easy win in round number one. But then we were talking about fast qualifiers and qualifying position. I feel like this next pair kind of gives us support for the thought that Taurus 3 is probably the fast qualifier, in that he faces off against Goliath, which is never going to be a fast qualifier anywhere.
No, poor Goliath. I mean, honestly, when you looked at Goliath, you had a front engine and a rear engine, and you would honestly think, oh, wow, he's got twice the power. I don't think he ever ran those two engines at the same time at a show. I think it was always either the front or the rear, or one was there for looks. I don't know 100%, but it's still a great looking truck. But at the same time, when you're looking at the other lane and you're seeing that low, mean, snoop-nosed Taurus over there.
It's the change in eras right there.
Exactly.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's going show where you weigh as much as a locomotive to race where you weigh as much as a stock car.
Yeah.
And so all of our listeners can really guess where this is going. And I'd say Junior doesn't use more than about half throttle ever on this run, and he's still at the finish line before Goliath is near the second.
Goliath can even get to the middle of no man's land. Taurus is parking.
Yeah. Now,
who was it? Minneapolis 88. I can't remember the announcer's name, but Bigfoot wins the race, and he goes, Bigfoot wins by a country mile. That was exactly this right here.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. And I will add, you don't see it in this video, but piecing some of the different archives that I've got together, I noticed that Goliath hits the second set of cars and comes down, and the front right wheel comes off of the truck, and he hangs up on the set of cars. So he doesn't even finish the race, loses the tire, something spectacular, but he already lost. It just helped. I couldn't help but think of, is it Canfield in 91? And I think that was against Taurus as well. So another embarrassing moment for Tura, where the truck kind of lets him down. But
Tura's least favorite color is maroon.
Right. Yeah, he had a hard time against Taurus 3.
You can actually speak to this next race better than I can, because Barefoot defeats Pony Express, but there's nothing really to note from the camera angle that I saw. Barefoot's already shown flying across the finish line here, midway over the last set of cars, so I don't know exactly what happens in this race.
Yeah, I think one thing you can deduce out of what you see in that video is Barefoot's looking fast. He's galloping quickly over that second set of cars.
Oh, yeah. It's a much faster looking Barefoot.
Yes. Now, the backstory is this is actually Barefoot versus Pony Express. And this is another one of those, I watched it and the reaction was not fan-friendly because it was kind of startling to go, where's Pony Express? Because I didn't get entire views of either truck, but basically Pony Express is coming off the first set of cars and Barefoot's crossing the finish line. Like Pony just had an awkward landing and Barefoot galloped really quickly. But if the last race was a country mile, this might be a little bit further. And kind of startling. Yeah. I mean, and we talked about Pony being impressive.
The reason that we're emphasizing this, though, is this is a proven truck that Barefoot just goes out and puts a stomping on.
It's not even so much. Pony was a little off the game, but Barefoot was so on the game that it made everything look terrible. Had this been basically almost any other truck except for Barefoot and Taurus 3 and maybe Excalibur, this probably would have been an okay race, but this was an embarrassment.
Yes, unfortunately it was for Pony Express. Barefoot, on the other hand, that's going to look good for sponsors. Just go out there and destroy a truck like that. I mean, Hess is proving to you that, yes, I know Taurus 3 is here, and this is what I think of it. I think that's exactly what that pass was.
Laying nothing off, basically, and just laying it down.
Next race, four-wheel crazy and not. Well, go ahead.
No, I think we were on the same path, actually. We were getting ready to talk about this final race, and I feel like you stack Taurus 3 and Barefoot in the middle of the bracket, and it kind of, when you get to that fourth race of round number 1, it almost seems anticlimactic because it's like a
Medusa freestyle. You want to go get some popcorn.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Maybe go to the bathroom. No, I'm kidding. We got four-wheel crazy and Nightmare right here. And Nightmare actually has a pretty wild pass. Quite thrilling to me to watch Steve try to keep this truck under control after landing in no man's land. He goes on to take the win here. I don't know. I thought it was a very weird bounce into the last set for Nightmare, but it worked for it, and the truck goes on to take the win.
See, to me, I thought this was kind of almost Penda 91 in Indy, where Nightmare's there racing. He's against a lot of higher tech suspension trucks, but the truck somehow keeps winning. It kind of vaults over and downsides the first set of cars, and then can kind of bouncy power the rest of the way through. And as long as he gets that fortunate bounce kind of coming up over the second set, he was a contender. I feel like it was sort of the same thing here. It was kind of good landing off of the first set, but then awkward bouncing through the middle, and he gets that fortuitous bound coming into the second obstacle that allows him to carry it to victory. So awkward bouncing.
Awkward bounce, but just about the perfect bounce that he could probably get.
That truck worked really well when he could get it bouncing in just the right way, because it was big, heavy leafer, and it was going to bounce. But there were a lot of situations where he got it bouncing the right way, and this was one of those, and it worked out for him. But that rounds out round number 1.
Mm-hmm.
And like last night, we head into the consolation bracket here, and I'm trying to look at what I've got here. I think we've got a missing race, perhaps.
Yeah, I kind of believe so as well. You had told me beforehand, Nightmare defeats Four-Wheel Crazy, and then Pony Express defeats Four-Wheel Crazy.
Right. So they brought Four-Wheel back twice.
And now playing the role of Durliner Giant from night 1 is Four-Wheel Crazy.
Yes. But then we move into the semifinals, and so things should be heating up a little bit more if they weren't already boiling. Because we're getting down to it, and we should have some tough trucks. And so, first out, we've got Barefoot bringing out Giant.
Yeah, and this is an awkward one. I don't know exactly what happens here, but I think we had discussed before we started recording probably some breakage that may have went on here. We don't see Excalibur at all aside from round 1, so I'm assuming something broke on Excalibur. I'm assuming something probably broke on Four-Wheel Crazy as many times as it lost in this evening. Nightmare, another one. Nightmare won in round 1. It's in the Conci. It defeats Four-Wheel Crazy. Not here in the semifinals. I'm assuming that's the truck that broke.
Yeah, I think there was some breakage going on
no,
here.
not Nightmare. Excuse me, Nightmare didn't break. No, never mind. Nightmare's the next race. I'm assuming that
Yep.
Four Wheel Crazy, or excuse me, Pony Express is the one that actually broke, and that's why we're not seeing that particular pair.
Which is actually brings up one of the challenges of watching and trying to sort out some of these old home video events is there are a lot of creative things to create show at the live event that were done, and without Army Armstrong voicing it over to tell us what's happening, sometimes you're just trying to figure out what's actually taking place at the event.
Exactly. This is definitely one of those times as I completely forgot who was going where.
So I'm okay with admitting that the consolation round in this situation, we're a little unsure of everything that's gone on to get there. And as we move into those semifinals, we're guessing that there was some breakage with Excalibur, and so they brought Giant, which was the competitor, back. And I've seen Giant give Barefoot some really good races. In this situation, I'll say Giant had the lights on, and that was really cool.
That was exactly my point, exactly what I put in the notes. The Giants' lights come on, and that's about the only redeeming factor of this entire race for the truck. Barefoot leaves it in the dust. Giant crawls over the finish line like Paul White after running a mile. And if you're a wrestling fan, you know that joke.
Yeah, it's definitely a big show here, and it's gonna get bigger. Barefoot cruised on to the finals, setting up at least one half of what could be a very cool final race. Looking very smooth in that run too, by the way. Yes. On the other side of that bracket, in the other semifinal pair, looking to go against Barefoot, we've got Taurus 3 and Nightmare.
Yes. That's another one that you could probably pay quite a bit of money to see on a given night. As far as I'm concerned, I always loved the Nightmare truck, and I think Steve knew that he was going to have to really push it right here, and that's exactly what he does in this race. This is where you see Taurus really show off what Taurus 3 can do, as far as I'm concerned. The truck launches. You see that familiar left front tire kind of tuck underneath the truck. It lands squarely in no man's land, goes to the second set. But what really surprises me, and I mean, you can barely see it in the clip, Nightmare barely gets the tires on the cars. It comes off to the left side, though, and I think that actually helps it because the tires bite into the dirt and actually propels the truck a little farther forward than what you would probably have thought. And that's exactly where Taurus, I mean, it's closer than it probably should have been. I'll put it that way.
Steve gave it his all.
He gave it everything he had.
And again, he had some fortuitous movement in the truck. Where the truck kind of launched sideways, and so it landed a little sideways coming off the cars, but still moving on a forward trajectory. So it kind of moved the truck back down a little more smoothly than kind of the all four wheel rebound bounce. And so and he was hammering it. You could tell he was giving it everything it had. He was gonna make it or break it. And I mean, Willman had a great run. He barely clipped the backside of that fifth car coming off, which I think helped settle, so it wasn't a hard impact on the dirt, and the truck settled right down. I mean, he was giving it a run. Something I did just notice, he hit the second set of cars, and again, it kind of lost a little bit of forward momentum pile driving into those cars, even though we've mushed the cars down into a pretty good ramp at this point. But the truck does sponge up some of the forward energy and slows the truck down just a little bit. And Hess is right there. I'd say it was probably, say half a truck length.
Yeah, I would say it's about a half a truck length win for Taurus. Honestly, surprised that Nightmare pushed it that hard, but at the same time, kudos to Steve Hess for basically being part one of the Hess sandwich here for Taurus.
Yeah, and I mean, Hess's truck would take the abuse. That was one of the great things. It seemed pretty strong, and so hopefully he had the faith in the truck, and wasn't just thinking with ego or anything. But he ran the truck hard when he knew he definitely had to if he was going to win. Just didn't quite get it, but it was a great race.
Right here is about where the tape goes out for me, and there's a start of a race, and I couldn't quite tell which trucks it were before the tape kind of does that old thing that tracking used to do for all you young kids out there that don't know what tracking is. It kind of messes up a little bit, and you see the tail end of what looks like Four Wheel Crazy going off into the sun, going off into the moon set. We'll put it that way. I'm assuming that's Excalibur and Four Wheel Crazy's Conci final, and we don't really see. I don't see it anyway. I don't know if you have that over there.
This is, yeah, I was able to scrounge up an angle that provided some information on this one. This is Excalibur and Four Wheel Crazy, like you said, presumably in the Consolation Round final. The consolation bracket we already established was awfully weird, so not exactly sure how they got there, but speculation. Excalibur broke early on, and they were able to get the truck together and brought it back just to run in the consolation finals. Is just part of the show.
Yeah, and I mistakenly said earlier we don't see Excalibur again, but we do here in the consolation final, basically taking the third place race. Before we go into this race, and I think this, as soon as Taurus 3 was unloaded, I think this is what everybody was anticipating that day.
Yeah. As soon as you see Barefoot and Taurus 3, it's like, no disrespect to the other guys, but this was the expectation, was that we were going to see Barefoot versus Taurus 3.
I think if any one of those drivers that were there watched that truck come off the trailer, they knew if they couldn't be racing it in the final, they were kind of probably hoping Scott Hess was.
This race, this is what Jack was looking for. Jack was looking for this opportunity when he said, bring Taurus 3 up.
Yes, exactly.
And so this this is another one of those races that's worth the price of admission. And I'd love to another one of those best of fives that I'd love to watch as well.
I don't know that these trucks would have lasted through a best of 5 with these two drivers behind the wheel.
No, it would have been Talladega Nights running to the finish line.
It already was Talladega Nights. Should we just go ahead and spoil the finish?
I mean, let's get into this. I mean, you can practically smell the hatred through the 30-year-old video that we're watching here.
Oh, yeah.
As these two trucks are sitting on the line, you've got a lot of extra pre-roll on the video before this actually starts. I mean, all the other races, it was almost, all right, they're staged, start the camera, green light. This, you've got 45 seconds of the trucks just sitting there, staging up, waiting on the line.
It reminds you of a drag race final between two guys in like a street race where one guy just kind of doesn't want to pull in and the other guy's kind of sitting there for a couple of minutes. It reminds me of that, and a race you can compare it to on television. If you ever watched Flemington, New Jersey, 1990 with, I think it's Bigfoot 8, Andy Brass, and Scott Stevens and King Crunch. And you kind of hear Steve Stevens over the microphone. Yeah, me and Andy, we play those games. You hear him over the microphone, and they're backing in and out of the staging lanes. They dedicate almost a minute to that broadcast of those trucks backing in and out of the staging lanes. It's kind of what you get right here.
And you may not know who is going to win in this situation, but you know what this race is going to be, and that's
it's the big fight
full
field.
Boogaloo double throwdown.
Say
to
that
pull
again?
out as many Army Armstrong isms as I can in one episode. This is a full Boogaloo double
episode
throwdown.
that Army's not even in. We're still bringing you Army Armstrong, ladies and gentlemen. Scott Hess probably felt like he was put on notice the second this truck got unloaded earlier in the day. One can only imagine the things that were going on amongst competitors that afternoon between each other. I'm pretty sure there was a lot of poking the bear.
Hey,
poking the bear. On paper.
Hey, but you got to remember, if you mess with the bulls, you're going to get the horn.
Exactly, and that's what's going to happen here. We've got a bear and a bull getting ready to take off here. On paper, looking at these two trucks with the suspension and everything underneath of them, I feel that on paper it's almost a no contest as far as which truck is going to win in a race. However, as Army Armstrong has put in the past, is paper and pencil can beat what's on that computer screen. And this is exactly what happens here. It's still surprising to me to this day. State-of-the-art Taurus 3 comes out. They have one hell of a race here, Chris. I'm not even going to deny that this is one hell of a race. The bounce for Barefoot off the first set of cars is the exact bounce that it needed. It's one of those things like we were talking earlier when we were talking round one in the previous day's competition, when the truck lands and catapults forward, exactly what happens here.
It's like our old Hot Wheels car sets. When you push the button and the car launches down the track, they both come out of the hole guns blazing. I mean, you can practically see head gaskets blowing as they take off.
There is no release of the throttle whatsoever.
Not a bit. Both trucks clear the first set of cars almost perfectly, I think. Hess is a little cockeyed, which kind of like Hess, the other Hess, kind of Scott Hess in Barefoot comes off the first set of cars just a little leaning to the side.
To the left. He's a little to the left of the landing.
Just like Steve Hess in Nightmare did in his race against Barefoot, or in his race against Taurus, that that he kept up with Taurus 3. It kind of helped the truck settle, I think, but also slingshotted that truck. And I mean, Taurus is right there. I mean, Taurus, there's nothing wrong with Taurus's run. And so they are basically what I'd call dead even coming to that second set of cars. Yeah. And one of the key features is they're both heading hard and strong, but they're also not perfectly in shape. And as they hit the second set of cars, they're both kind of angling towards the center. Yeah.
One thing I'll point out here is earlier when we had talked about the pass where Barefoot kind of launched forward, it's the exact same effect in this race that it had before. It hits just barely, the nose comes down barely before those cars. That double trampoline bounce hits with those leaf springs, and Barefoot gets just about the most air I think you're ever going to see this truck get.
Or any leafer for that matter.
Or any leafer for that matter, yes. He skies it. Taurus kind of lands off to the right a little bit, and literally Barefoot lands on top of Taurus.
Yeah.
Not by much. The left rear tire kind of drives down the hood of Taurus. It's a good thing it's a Snoop nose and it's angled downward.
Right.
You see some of the fiberglass on Taurus coming off. You see Jack come to a complete stop, and you just see Barefoot keep driving to try and drive out of the bounce that it's having after this finish.
I've actually got it still framed right here in front of me. And in the prior event, we talked on the Bonsai run, we talked about him being able to jump over his own truck. In this case, he's basically jumping over a truck that is jumping over cars. Yes. This is a very different orientation for the truck than in the prior event that we were talking about, where the truck launched and kind of highly arced and nosed over into the ground. In this case, it's nose high just a little bit. It looks like it's going to hurt when he flat lands it, because he's either going to flat land it or hit barely on the rear and pancake his face into the steering wheel when the front kicks down. But this is definitely the highest I think I've ever seen a leaf sprung truck. And lucky for old Scott Hess, Jack Willman Jr. was there.
He's got a really nice state-of-the-art suspension truck to just land on top of.
And I believe Scott kind of said the same thing to me, because we've talked about this a couple times before, that he needed the suspension of both trucks, given how high the truck actually launched. I don't think he expected it. I'm sure he didn't expect it to launch that high, but he happened to ride all the way down the A-pillar, across the headers, across the hood, down the front tire of Taurus, and it really actually helped the landing. It could have been a much worse incident for Barefoot had he not actually landed on Taurus. And you're right. Willman in Taurus came to a dead stop when that happened.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he wasn't expecting what happened right there. He hits the brakes, the truck comes to the stop. You see the rear quarter panel of the truck kind of snap off. And I'm thinking that's just from the shock of hitting the brakes. That's not from the truck landing on the hood. But You can't really see, from my angle, you can't really see what exactly happens to Barefoot. I know Hess drives out of it fine, but you can't see where it's going after the landing. It's completely pitch black back there where he's driving off into.
He's driving off into the sunset, boy.
Oh, he's driving off into the moon, trying to leap
Yeah.
over it, trying to follow that, what is it, the fork in the spoon jumping over the moon or something like that. He's following them at this point. But I got to tell you, literally the first thing when I ever saw this race a couple of years ago, the first thing I thought of was an old Ricky Bobby quote. I'm flying through the air. This isn't good. That's literally the first thing that I thought of when I saw this. And my eyes to this day, every time I watch this race, almost pop out of my skull watching just to see this truck get that much air. It's insane how much air this truck gets. We were talking the day before how it probably could have cleared 12 cars. I'm going to say it cleared 15 right here.
I didn't even think about the magnitude of the distance of the jump because both trucks...
The distance and the height, it's incredible to look at.
He is... I've still framed it again. I'd say Taurus is at least a car width past the set of cars and a full length of Taurus, and then somewhere out there, Barefoot is landing.
So Taurus is probably the length of about 3 cars.
And so this could...
3 or 4 cars.
You're probably looking at 15 cars,
15
really.
Cars that he probably cleared right there.
The one thing that kind of tames down some of the spectacle a little bit is because we talked about it getting dark. This is a fairgrounds. There's not a ton of light there. Exactly. We can definitely see what's happening, but you still can't completely see what's happening. You know these trucks just hit, but because it's not a professional videographer, because it's dark, if you had the TV camera and proper lighting there, watching this would be King Kong on the police car spectacle every time.
Every single time. This is something that you for a lot of years people didn't see, and that's why I think whenever it was talked about and the video got released for a little while before people started doing what they did with it, that's why it was the stuff of legend, and that's why it gets getting talked about here on this podcast. It's something that is just an incredible moment in monster truck racing history.
Yeah, I had heard about this before, and then the moment I actually found this in somebody's archive, it's the excitement is very real. It was very exciting to finally see it. And it is incredible. Hopefully we've done a pretty good job of describing all of this for everybody. We want to help everybody visualize. I think something else that's interesting, I managed to find a second angle that I had of this event of night 2, and something that you'll commonly see in old home video shot monster truck event footage. As soon as something big happens, the camera cuts off. Yeah. And I'll be darned. The one that we had from Jack cuts off basically within a second after Taurus 3 comes to a rest. You see enough to know that Barefoot did not crash, but that's about it. Yes. The other video was almost the exact same thing. It was a different angle, and it cut off almost the exact same time. And I've seen that a lot with a lot of spectacular moments where, whoa, where'd the camera go? Really?
Or you get
camera shake.
There's a famous clip from Bigfoot that was in the 25th anniversary VHS tape where, here you see the truck about to roll over, but the camera cuts away. Literally, the truck's starting to roll over, and then you see the camera come down.
Yeah. Yep. Lots of those, and these are perfect examples of that, which I do think is funny, but it also shows the magnitude of the moment. Yes. But I think overall, this shows a lot of things. Jack was furious after this.
I cannot imagine why.
he was definitely stomping his way over towards trying to find Scott Hess. And I believe that Aaron Polburn, the announcer, and the promoter happened to intercept him along his way and managed to talk him down before fisticuffs or anything happened.
Yeah, but even still, even if you're watching this race, I understand he's angry. I don't understand the anger towards Hess because his driver is doing the exact same thing in the other lane.
But the perception in the moment was that
he hurt my truck.
Hit my truck. He came into my lane. He also almost killed my kid. There's a lot of things that can fly emotionally in a moment like that. So we've got the privilege of sitting in our armchairs and commentating back about it. And we can clearly see that both trucks were heading towards the center.
Yes.
And it happens. Ultimately, no, it was a dangerous situation.
At this particular event, they don't have the luxury of getting an instant replay.
Right. And so Aaron Polburn talks him off the cliff, and it goes down in monster truck legend, basically. And it also shows the incredible show value and show quality of the events that you would see on the Thunder National Series. Because I'd love to say this was a one-off event where something insane happens, where you've got trucks giving it 100 or more %. But it's not. I mean, there are a lot of other events that are just this way. Mansfield comes to mind. Fort Wayne, they've got a couple. They did shows in Indianapolis that people never really even realized. Lots of great events where the trucks are just putting on a phenomenal show.
Yep, and this is certainly one of them. We're glad that we were able to watch this thanks to the International Motorsports Museum and Hall of Fame, as well as Jack Willman, who provided at least my angle of it. You've got several. I'm jealous, by the way. You need to start sending me some of that over here. But this event just, if anything, by watching it, and I know there are only 7-minute clips that I watched of each event, but to me, it's a giant proving ground weekend for Scott Hess. Because he's out there and he takes the brunt of one of the biggest teams in monster truck racing at the time, Taurus. And granted, he's driving for one of the biggest teams in monster truck racing, Barefoot. But he's not Fred Schaefer. And even today, you'll see people, oh, who's driving Gravedigger? Oh, it's so-and-so. And there are people, well, what happened to Dennis? Well,
second driver always has a hurdle to overcome.
And this right here, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of those things where the second driver not only leaped over the hurdle, but he leaped over the other truck.
For sure. And Hess, in 1990, it was really the proving year for Hess. Because it wasn't every event, but on the indoor circuit, he was battling Kramer in Bigfoot 9. And they were about like this, toe to toe. They were sparring back and forth, and I feel like they kind of split it about even, which I think is kind of impressive, actually.
Yes. This Barefoot truck just does not get enough credit for what kind of a leafer truck that it was by some of the people out there. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to cover this event, was to bring some light towards this particular Barefoot. If you'd like to see what this truck looked like, go and look at the photos of the truck that's sitting in the International Museum and Hall of Fame right now. That's very similar to what this truck looks like in this particular event. And that's a truck that's going out there and beating one of the state-of-the-art trucks. And then, as you said later on, it's going out and beating another one in Bigfoot 9.
Being the show and the showstopper.
Exactly. This is Shawn Michaels.
Yeah. That's some of what led to Scott Hess being a Monster Truck Hall of Fame inductee, while not necessarily being on TV all the time.
Not being on TV all the time, not being necessarily in the spotlight, but still being one of those guys that everybody knows within the industry.
He was going to be top-notch no matter what, setting the bar. And I think that's a lot of what we look for in inductees for the Hall of Fame. And we've got, and the Hall of Fame has a wide range of people voting on this. And so it's cumulative input. But the idea is definitely, you want somebody that's going to be pushing the bar, raising the bar. And Hess did that throughout his career. And so as he
certainly raised it this particular weekend.
Yes. And through a lot of the preservation efforts that I've been making in conjunction with the Hall of Fame and the original owners of the footage, coordinating with them to preserve a lot of this footage through digitization. It's unearthed a lot of things that people did not necessarily know, and it's allowed much greater research, which I think has also benefited the Hall of Fame product. And so I think everybody's benefiting from this. And you talked about wanting to see some of this footage. Definitely come to the Hall of Fame. I love seeing people react to this stuff, and sometimes the actions of a few can hurt the many, but I still love finding ways to show people all this incredible footage. So best advice right now is definitely to come to the Hall of Fame and see a wondrous many thing.
Exactly. It's like Disneyland for monster truck fans.
That is absolutely right, because it's definitely the happiest place on earth for any monster truck.
If you like trucks with 4 big tires that crush cars, it is certainly the most happiest place on earth to go. With that, though, Chris, I thank you very much for coming on to the show. This was a fun one. We didn't have nothing to talk about TV-wise on this one, but man, I got to tell you, just the action from this event alone was worth the conversation, and I hope everybody enjoyed it, and we'll be coming at you again next week on the Tracks Across America.